Security teams need visibility into Linux systems to detect and investigate incidents and protect against unwanted activity. Operations teams are not down with downtime, and with revenue tied to uptime, ops priorities are enterprise priorities. Which is a higher priority? Why not both? Capsulate provides flexible, production-ready infrastructure protection for Linux systems, all without a kernel module. With ops-friendly production security, Capsulate delivers monitoring, detection, and response without adding operational risk or cost. Visit securityweekly.com/capsulate today to request a demo. Application security is hard when security is separated from your DevOps workflow. Security has traditionally been the final hurdle in the development lifecycle. Iterative development workflows can make security a release bottleneck. With GitLab, security is built into the CI/CD process. Every code commit is automatically scanned for security vulnerabilities in your code and its dependencies. Results are delivered to the developer in their native workflow for rapid remediation. Learn how GitLab enables DevSecOps. Visit securityweekly.com/GitLab for a 30-day free trial. In a fast-paced tech environment, the potential attack surface increases with each release and new app created. Detectify automates cutting-edge knowledge from trusted ethical hackers into the development pipeline for reliable application security. Go beyond the OWASP top 10. Check your web apps for over 2,000 known vulnerabilities actively exploited in the wild, monitor subdomains for potential takeovers, and remediate security issues in staging and production. Learn more with a free trial at securityweekly.com/detectify. Go hack yourself.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. I'm your host, Mike Shima, joined by the man without hats, John Kinsella. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by completing the form at securityweekly.com/guests. We review suggestions monthly and will reach out to you once reviewed. Our next live webcast will be on March 18th at 11 a.m. Eastern, where you will learn how to prepare Linux hosts for unexpected threats. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register now. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they're available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Also, check out last week's episode 140 to get a sneak peek at the topics that webcast is going to cover. So John, I have a couple of articles, obviously, on our show notes, but there's actually one article that I didn't post on purpose that I wanted to talk about why. And there's a lot about, of course, SolarWinds. We started off the year talking about this, but the recent news I've been reading about SolarWinds are all about, a default password on essentially a bug bounty finding. And was it 1,000 engineers or more or less that worked on that backdoor, which are all kind of, I think, irrelevant to what the real problem is in application security around this of supply chain and how can we actually harden supply chain, review supply chain. So once the articles start getting back around to the important parts of the problem, then I'll decide to throw them in there. Not sure if you want to plead defense on their behalf, but I'll give you a chance.
Nope. Yeah, I've been watching this stuff come flying across, and you can imagine the snark going through my head on some of these. I didn't even click on that. I mean, the one that's sticking in my head, I have to say, where I didn't click past the headline, but apparently the execs are throwing an intern under the bus or something. I don't know. I'm going to hope that's wrong and not get too on my pedestal on that one. It's it's been interesting to me actually on this whole topic. This has really increased the interest in supply chain security. We've had guests on the past talking about this, but CNCF has really gotten into this. There's a few other orgs out there that seem like they're really starting to do some serious research about how do you do this right. There's some open source tools that are getting more attention that handle parts of that solution. I'm sure there's a bunch of startups out there that are working on that and are going to. So it's interesting to actually see that get traction across a bunch of different areas. It's still interesting to see some vendors out there aren't giving it due diligence yet. One of the larger source code repository organizations don't support signed Git commits yet for the on-prem version of the product. Come on. So it's going to be interesting, I think, next few months to sort of see how this breaks down and comes out. But it is nice to see it getting a little more attention on the good parts where we're not seeing the articles for yet.
Absolutely, and we'll make sure to keep an eye on this because I know there's more snark we can pull out of you, John. And I know there's also got to be some great feedback or maybe some open source tools that our listeners are actually turning to or becoming more interested in on this area. So if you've got that, let us know. What are some areas that you'd like to hear more about, or what else could we talk about on the show along that a very constructive, proactive sort of approach to things. But we'll get to. Go ahead.
We both, plus the rest of the Security Weekly team, we're watching YouTube comments, as well as Discord. Wow, I'm not even on Discord today as I talk about it, but we're watching this stuff and we take feedback from people. So please, as you guys have ideas, I'm not going to say, but I am going to say like and subscribe. But seriously, if you guys have thoughts, definitely get them out there to us.
There you go. The chances to like and subscribe in Discord before John gets in there and messes everything up. But we have some other things to talk about as well. One of them was actually a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart. This was an exploration of JSON interoperability vulnerabilities. And it was a little bit interesting, or it was interesting to me, not so much the JSON part, but the idea of parsing is something we've talked about quite a bit. And this was kind of neat because the article is just about what do quirks look like? And quirks are kind of everywhere. There's been browser quirks, which are fortunately in this modern age of HTML5 and, could also call it consolidation of how many browser vendors are out there. But the parsing HTML, parsing JSON in this particular example article can be interesting because once you get into some interesting corner cases that things go sideways. And this is also where vulnerabilities might show up. So you can have a standard, but then you have the implementation of that standard might not be consistent across different parsers. And that's maybe a little bit of what, call back to what we were just talking about with Ted in our previous segment. And so this to me just stood out from that perspective of what's the parsing look like? How messy can JSON be? And what are some surprising areas in the sense of how it's handling Unicode or UTF-8 or character points, things like that? So I don't know if John, in your daily life, you have to deal with JSON too much, but this is your chance to highlight in particular pet peeves, perhaps, about that format or about the different tools you've seen consume it.
Yeah, we deal with JSON and YAML a ton. Luckily for me, I only have to deal with the Go implementations of that. I'm sure some of our folks have to deal with the browsers, but that's not my problem. But this is it really it's almost I'm forgetting my words, but yeah, it brings out strong emotions for me. Even just looking at the Go side of things. This is a great article, I think. I feel so bad for folks who have to deal with JSON across several of these different languages. There's two things down towards the end of this one. There's a section called the results. So the parser behavior results, where they actually list out how the different parsers, which ones do and don't support some of these things, or which ones sort of throw metal bits when you do something, and then the appendix of the version numbers that they're using. It sounds so simple, and it's like we saw this before with XML, right? To sort of scare people in that way, and it's something that we think it's so standardized and so simple. Yeah, man, it gets complex and strange, and what really gets me on the Go side of things is just absolutely horrible error messages and how it actually the trouble I have to go to parse and provide a user with a useful error message out of a parser. And I haven't even touched on the malloc issues yet and like how all that stuff is handled for a large JSON document. But this is definitely a good read for anyone who's working on this type of stuff. It sounds so nice and so simple when you do it at first, because I think this is one of those things. Actually, it's a good example for what we talk about, I think, for security in a lot of cases. Where the developer just grabs a library and uses it, right? We've been talking about this a lot over the past years. But, okay, I've got this JSON document which is coming from a third party. I need to marshal that bad boy so I can do something with the data, blah, 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 right? How often do we actually look carefully at what we're doing? So they throw it at the marshaler, probably mostly the marshaler that's part of the language they're using for a modern language. And then they take the output. So, that one of the ones they have up top was the multiple keys, right? Sorry, duplicate keys, and which one gets precedence. Perfect example, and we haven't even got through the rest articles. This is a good read for folks. I think it's a lot more complex than it sounds.
Absolutely. And it, for me, it also ties back to JSON is text-based. Like, for the most part, it's human readable, at least for humans who've had enough coffee to get through it. But in spirit, just a couple episodes ago, we were talking about Google Project Zero, and they were looking at WebRTC and those binary protocols, and which ostensibly, again, are standards, but looking at messaging apps and how there's state machines get kind of out of sync. Even though the design might be consistent, the implementations are different. And then even just to your point about, the article starts off with what takes precedent in terms of, field value numbers, or duplicate values. We saw a little bit of that in the sense of HTTP request smuggling from a year or two ago from Portswigger, just showing out the difference between transfer encoding and content length, and just what does your one front-end web server handle it, and how does the perhaps back-end reverse proxy handle that? So there's definitely universality to this type of problem of parsing, and the problems happen. So I guess that was the only other thing I wanted to add on to that, and maybe we can move on to the next topic, which I'll throw out. Also talking about hacking. This is from Veracode, so a bit vendor-oriented article here, but pretty cool in the sense that Veracode is opening up what they're calling their first ever hacker games to colleges, universities, and but they also have a forever free community edition of essentially how to do hands-on in your browser, find and fix security vulnerabilities in code, basically common code patterns and what do they look like. So I thought that was pretty cool, and a good way just to have some more education and tooling to support that.
My first thought when I saw this is that time of year, right? Security vendors are usually spending money in Moscone, and I'm starting to wonder now if maybe they've got some extra money. So let's see what interesting things they'll do. I'm always a fan for security companies to have a free version of their tool for either folks just getting into the space to be able to play with it, or potential customers get a taste without having to go to too much trouble. So that's good. I'm actually really curious to see what comes out of this. Right? Sometimes this seems, I think, and it's Veracode, right? So they know what they're doing, but it seems it's not quite that we are unhackable type thing, which some companies do when they want to try and get, security PR. So hopefully this will have some good results out of it, and some folks will go get some interesting experience and some cash.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. And I think kind of, talking about code and reading code and learning from code, that ties in to one of the other articles I pulled out around GitHub article about securing OpenSSL. And basically, the technical details of this article, I think you can skip over. So you're forgiven for this. And I think Matt isn't here, so he might have been scared off that I included this because it got way too much in the details and it was in crypto items. But the lesson for me from this article was that it's neat to learn from code, sure, but it's sort of how to choose your own adventure. Which, hey, shout out to some good nostalgia for that title. But it was looking at the perspective of a developer and the second perspective of a security researcher. So it's a good write-up to say sort of, how do I want to look at this? And the part that was important for me that I think could be more generalized as sort of the lesson to take away from this. In this case, they were using CodeQL. So a little bit of, again, we're playing around with vendors talking about how good their tools are, but basically using CodeQL to say, I found one bug in this one particular instance, but where else might this bug be? And rather than use my own eyeballs to go around and try to read through it as I have my Vim open and I'm opening up a whole bunch of different text files, maybe I can just write a good semantic, scanner to go crawl that AST, that abstract syntax tree, and use other types of fancy words just to say, where else is this bug? Find that bug elsewhere and squash all those as well. So it's a little bit better than playing the whack-a-mole approach to security. So that was one of the approaches or why this one stood out to me.
But it is a little on the crypto side of things. But what I actually did like about it was the examples around CodeQL. I think at least when I first saw CodeQL, it was very much a okay, cool. At some point, I'll get the time to play with that, and I still haven't. But I think the examples they're concrete enough and just complex in a good way enough that actually shows you some of the power of that language. So I thought that was pretty cool, to be honest. And OpenSSL, yeah, they had another vulnerability a few weeks ago. I don't think this was talking about that one, but I don't know, maybe it is. So yeah, it's at least the gift that keeps giving from OpenSSL is hopefully folks will learn how to secure their own software.
Exactly. And hopefully, too, we see something like CodeQL become a useful tool, sort of the lingua franca of here's how to find a bug. Because if it is easy to express, look for this particular pattern in just a few lines that are easy to read and consume, and importantly to share, I think that could be helpful for the broader industry. And I did include a Microsoft article actually related to Solaragate, where they were using also CodeQL just to show some examples of indicators of compromise, or essentially what did that Solaragate, as they're terming it, type of backdoor look like in a couple different examples of code. So you could run this on your own. And I thought that was kind of interesting, not I think in the sense that people are going to suddenly find all of these backdoors everywhere, but it's a good way to just express here is the pattern that's a known bad problem, and here's an easy way for you to go and find it against your own source code. So something to share, something to kind of broaden amongst the community. This now, two articles that I think work well together are one from McKinsey talking about developer velocity at work, which brought in some key lessons, and engineering practices that can overcome DevOps challenges, which the titles of the articles sound, they sound very consultant-y, but I think there is some meat in there to talk about for these articles. One of them, for example, the engineering practices, I like that it breaks down not just software development, it calls out management practices and basically, the human practices and project management practices of DevOps as being important to making this type of approach succeed. So that was one of the things I appreciated from that particular article.
When I saw the McKinsey one, I'm like, oh, cool, Matt's on the show this week. Wasn't expecting that from you, but he went from this guy. He goes from hardcore sort of geekery and the crypto stuff to talking about McKinsey. Okay, it does have a consultancy feel to it, but I think that's that form of speak will be how would I say easier to parse or understand, or it's going to open more doors for at least some of our listeners or their bosses. So that's not a bad thing. On the DevOps.com one, I think the best part of it to me was the headline. Sorry, but I think maybe I'm reading it wrong. I don't know. Please, give me your own thoughts. But engineering practices overcome DevOps challenges. Completely agree with that, but there wasn't a lot of meat in it. It felt like, and maybe it's just someone wants me to get their book, and that's okay. I'm not going to, but I think any of these points could have been a really long article. I mean, this was one of those. I got a little bit into it. I'm like checking the scroll bar. How long is this? This could be very long, but it seemed to really gloss over things a little bit too quickly, at least for me.
Yeah, I think the aspects I have to admit that I appreciated the table of contents, essentially, that it felt like it was laying out here and saying that there's engineering challenges here, but engineering doesn't just mean write software. It does mean, how are you threat modeling? How are you handling the human development practices side of things? And that's sort of what I did appreciate, but there was it definitely sort of ran out of steam quickly. But the reason that I liked it was actually going back to the other article is that there was basically one or two sentences that stood out to me that I wanted to really highlight. The one was to quote, adopt architecture and engineering practices that support developers' work. And just that line alone, I think, is a great tenet for a security team to think about. Because if you're a security team trying to deliver value internally to your organization, you're probably still creating a product of sorts, or you're creating a service of sorts. And it might be as simple as, as a callback to our last segment, answering all those questions from your own clients about the vendor security questionnaires. It could be just setting up internal vulnerability assessment, internal vulnerability scanning. Or it could be some other type of meteor or security engineering that's helping as part of putting that silent security in silent sec into DevSecOps, and approaching that as from a product management perspective is, I think, a recent soapbox I've been jumping on and trying to harp on and really have those types of conversations with security teams to say, what value are you delivering beyond just, oh, we said you need to, meet this SLA to close out vulns, so go meet this SLA. And I think that's kind of missing the point of what security teams could be doing.
And as you sort of talk through that, and I look at this as we were calling it the TOC. I could see value in this for maybe a CISO who's coming from a more legacy environment into something that wants to be more DevOpsy. If that's been set like for a goal for the year, I think you've got what looks like 10 points there. I see that sort of, this tells you where to start, I think, at least a high level, and then go buy the book. But and that's not a bad thing, right? It's I forget, and I try to remember that a lot of these things seem really, I don't want to say obvious to me, but we breathe this stuff every day that for a lot of folks, just the phrase elastic infrastructure might end up with a weekend of interesting reading. So there's I can see it being valued to some folks.
Yeah, and I think there's a piece in there too about just having a little bit of shared vocabulary in how are we describing this, because on the show quite a bit we just say DevOps or DevSecOps and just kind of hand wave away exactly what we mean by that. And if we skip the definitions too much, we might make the wrong assumptions. And that's one of those things too that, speaking of definitions, for as much as I will perhaps rail against how much has the OWASP Top 10 helped us as a security industry, or how much has the security industry, avoided the problems that top 10 list, highlights. At least it has given us a good way to describe injection, attacks, authorization problems, cross-site scripting, CSRF, some of those categories of vulnerabilities. So then we can turn around and say, this class of vuln is bad. How can we get rid of this class, rather than say, oh, this is a type 0, type 1, type 2 type of vulnerability. Let's just kill it. Yeah.
And I think, a lot of us need, I'm working on some talks for upcoming year, but like, how do you get that talk started, right? At least for me, it usually comes back to, I don't know what, freshman English class, here's your outline, and then start filling it in. So I can sort of see from that sort of context jump there between those two. Yeah, having that, like I said, the top level before, and like these are the right phrases that you should be searching for, or this is language to speak with your team. I see value there, and sorry, I keep making a joke, but it's entertaining me. So the book is probably cheaper than engaging with McKinsey. So I haven't looked or seen anything about the book, but it's sorry, that's me being a little too snarky. But yeah, no, I think, right, it's this lays out some interesting points, and it could be, maybe it's not so much even to talk about with your team, right? If you're going looking for these people, writing, I was talking about the talk and engaging in developing this with your company. But if you're looking to hire folks to actually build up a team, once again, what are you looking for? What are those phrases you either want to see in a resume or in your job description when you're putting it out there? How do you make sure it pings and catches the right people? So as that high level document, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think to kind of build on what you're saying too, there's the doc, the high level one, also talks about SREs, and I think we've only mentioned maybe SREs once or twice in the program. One was when Google, speaking of books, don't worry, we won't quiz you if you've read this one yet, but Google published their SRE handbook, and it did have a lengthy chapter on specifically security, but in this case, to go back to your point about what are the words you're using, how are you hiring or how are you orienting your security team? To my mind, if you're doing DevOps, you're actually building software. So you're having some empathy about the security tools, the CI/CD pipeline, and the security tools that you're laying on top of that you're requiring your engineers to use. You have to use those same tools. The other thing, if you have SREs, maybe that's also implying that as the security org, you're actually owning and maintaining some services as well, which could be a good thing, and maybe even an important thing, depending on what you're offering. And that comes around to, hopefully, I think maybe the point I was trying to make about where's your product management for your internal security org, and how are you conveying those product and product value to the rest of your organization, that you're telling them, hey, use our tools, use this service, because either you have to because of policy, or you should be because it's the paved road, or it's the security baseline that we need to answer that vendor security questionnaire.
Mm. And
but with
no, keep going.
Yes. Yeah, well, I'm saying, speaking, with the book reading, I'm still working on that 200-page PDF from Apple that we talked about last week. So yeah, no more books on the horizon for me. But what is on the horizon, and which might be a teaser for you, John, is the OWASP 20th anniversary celebration is coming up this year. So we could look back to 2001, and I have pulled out a couple of old articles, not even from 2001, but I think even from 1991 or thereabouts, around maybe security hasn't quite changed as much as we think it has, especially cross-site scripting has been around, and call it HTML injection from the very beginning. But what has gotten better there? So we can look back and be a little bit pessimistic about maybe things haven't changed as much as they should have in the past 20 years. But the CFP is opening soon for this September for the OWASP Global AppSec Conference. And so here's your chance for all of you listeners to think about, what is, what's security going to look like to be better in, 20 years from now, or just even right now? And maybe for that, John, if you have some ideas that you want to share, or, some of those presentation topics you want to tease, what might be one of the things that you'd either like to talk about, or at least like to see, in terms of security being better 20 years from now?
Actually, I think the talk I was referencing was it's an upcoming talk of mine on animal husbandry, so that might not be quite the same. No, okay. Yeah, sorry, bad joke. Coffee's still kicking in. So where I'm working on a paper too around both sort of security and Kubernetes and things like that, but then also hybrid computing. Doing a talk with DevOps.com in, I think, 3 weeks. I should probably know that, but it'd be interesting to actually see one or two good talks in this OWASP thing around what has changed, right? So maybe you and I can get together and we can submit that as a joint talk for the two of us. What have we seen change over the last 20 years? I mean, I think there's got to be some good things in there. It feels like a lot of stuff we're talking about is the same, maybe with, as I refer to the Band-Aids, the technology changes, but the Band-Aids are still the same. Yeah, so I'm being careful with what I say.
Well, I'll pick up that thread and say we need fewer Band-Aids and perhaps more amputations, and just get rid of a lot of the things that just haven't been working. So maybe that'll be the working title of the presentation that we'll work on. But part of that, I'll think of looking at picking on the front-end technologies, cross-site scripting. Let's just not let's just get rid of that altogether. And I want to say, fingers crossed, that we might see the relevance of that go away because of better frameworks, front-end frameworks that just make it harder to introduce, as well as improved browser designs and browser standards that make the impact of cross-site scripting vulnerabilities hopefully less impactful. Things like perhaps same origin cookie, things like that. But I'm maybe grasping at straws there. When I'm talking about the amputations, I'm thinking more of, what if we just got rid of some different classes and introduced some new tools or new capabilities and worried less about the nuance of here's how to make a particular attack really clever or fancy. Here's how to do some basic architecture. And that still sounds a little too generic as I'm talking out loud. So let me throw it back over to you.
No, you're close to something there, I think. Throw this one out to you, see how it sticks. And again, listeners, feedback always welcome. If you think about, I don't know, what polio, or there's probably some other large pandemics, can't think of anything happening right now, but stuff we've had in the past that, it when people actually got together on the same page and drove towards, I'd like to say eradicating completely. I think in polio's case, they pretty much did. But I'm very deadline driven. I think a lot of us are, but like goal driven in general. Let's take the deadline part away. A goal can be a good thing to go towards. So maybe take that concept you're just saying of like, okay, in 2021, as an industry, we are going to focus on getting rid of XSS across any products out there. If we see it in an open source project, a bunch of us are going to go there and help those guys and actually get it out of that. Maybe start using CodeQL a little bit more and actually finding out some of these patterns and removing them, and then sort of knocking them off one at a time. Would that get us closer? I don't know. What do you think?
I think I'm going to slightly answer the question in a different way, because there's also that aspect of supply chain. And you mentioned just earlier too, like signed code commits. We didn't really get into why the signed code commits are helpful, but that's going to give us, attestation. And maybe there is something around signed code commits. There was I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, the idea of reproducible builds was pretty interesting, at least a hot topic in InfoSec circles that I was following or paying attention to, but I haven't really heard about reproducible builds lately. So I don't know if it was something that it didn't have a goal that was working, that people were working towards enough, or people gave up because it was a harder problem than expected. So I think that type, and the reason I'm bringing that up is those are the harder, perhaps more interesting problems to solve or to try and tackle, like the eradicating cross-site scripting through some type of clever architecture, clever frameworks, moving towards that rather than just saying, here's now a CSP level 4 policy where we can kind of address the symptom, but not deal with the underlying cause.
Yeah, it's still going on. It's funny you mentioned that. I actually happen to have reproducible-builds.org in a tab. So people are in a recent tab. People are still looking and thinking about that. So it's still getting traction. Like I said, I think a lot of these things have started coming back into the forefront after this particular attack. So hopefully it'll keep going. We know the way this goes. Usually there's like a lot of noise and then everything dies down. My sense is we're going to get some good stuff out of this one. So fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, and fingers also still typing and working on those abstracts as we brainstorm some more ideas to show up for that September OWASP conference. So let's see what happens. And listeners, let us know if you're working on something, or if you have articles or things that you'd like us to share, or just chat about for you. We'd be happy to brainstorm here live on Application Security Weekly. So I want to say thank you, John, for helping me brainstorm live and riff on all of these different articles that we brought up, and want to thank all of you for listening as well and hanging out and talking with us in Discord. Thanks once again. We'll see you next week on Application Security Weekly.